Welcome to Neon Galactic. I'm James Falk. This is our second episode, and today we're chatting with James Iandoli of the Engaging the Phenomenon podcast. He's one of the central figures in what I've been calling a citizens UFO movement, a vast cohort of people from all walks of life who've taken up this issue and made it their life's passion, transforming themselves and the conversation in the process. James is an experiencer, and during our conversation, he'll tell his amazing story, one that features elements of what's been called woo, or visionary experiences, as well as sightings of concrete nuts and bolts craft. It's a unique and remarkable story. He's also the co-founder of the Inquiry into Anomalous Experiences and the Phenomenon Conference, the second of which will be held on December 3rd in New York City. A-list guests such as Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal together, or both on the roster, which is huge. Chris Mellon, perhaps the most effective and understated disclosure advocate working today, and author and Professor Jeffrey Kripal, who we had on this show last time. They'll all be there to share their experiences and their expertise. And luckily, tickets for the live stream are still available. But more than all that, James sits in the center of an informal web of folks, podcasters and journalists, seekers and armchair mystics, experiencers and disclosure advocates who have taken up the fight against secrecy and lies and have begun a subtle campaign of pressure against those who would keep us all in the dark. They won't settle for breadcrumbs and half-truths, and they inspire me. He's not the leader, there is no leader, but together they nurse those embers that first caught fire in this era in December of 2017. Together they are collectively determined that we'll never fall back into the old stigma-filled dark ages of post-Blue Book, post-Condon Report America. By clamoring for more insight, demanding more answers, and examining the truths that do get released, their work goes a long way toward breaking us all free of the lies that blind us. I'm on a journey to understand as much as possible about the UFO phenomenon and many of the related, often cryptic subjects that seem to go along with it. This channel is a way for me to chart that growth, memorialize these conversations, and add one more voice, however small, to the growing choir of human beings demanding to know all there is to know about the structure and complexity of our shared reality. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment if you're so inclined. Above all, please enjoy. James Iandoli, host of the Engaging the Phenomenon. Is that a podcast you call it, or what do you call it?
It's a YouTube channel. It's a podcast. It's just, it's an overall project, I guess.
Yeah, it's a UFO media empire, right?
You know what? Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm not even a media guy per se.
Yeah.
But here it's in 2022, anybody can be on social media and participate in whatever, given the vast amount of tools that we have these days. So
yeah, and you've make good use of them. So first thing I want to ask you about, to make sure that we get this covered and promote it like it should, Inquire Anomalous. You have a December 3rd event coming up, right?
Yeah, it's so Inquire Anomalous is kind of the handle that my friend Jay Christopher King and I of the Experiencer group have been using. The event on December 3rd is actually called An Inquiry into Anomalous Experiences and the Phenomenon. And this is kind of part two. The first day we had, Dr. Nolan, Exo Academian, Mitch Horowitz, and others.
Yeah.
And, this is kind of a continuation, similar theme, similar approach, with the idea of, it's an inquiry. So that's the approach we're going with. And, we're trying to refine the conversation. Again, there's a lot of academics involved. And, I think this is the type of conversation we need to have now. I mean, for the next event, one of the people speaking is Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, who you had on here.
Yeah.
And he's absolutely fantastic and forward thinking. And obviously, he's done a lot more than most of the UFO community even understand, with Esalen and the Invisible College and what have you.
Yeah.
And so having him there and and participating in kind of high level conversation regarding the subject is a complete honor. And again, we're gonna have Leslie Kean, who was one of the New York Times reporters who broke the story in December of 2017, along with Ralph Blumenthal. And this is the first event they've spoken at together.
I was wondering that because I hadn't seen them build together anywhere. Yeah.
Right. And on top of that, this is just about, it's just short of the 5-year anniversary of the December 16th, 2017 article about ATIP.
Mhm.
Yeah, glowing auras and black money. So yeah, and again, and Christopher Mellon as well. And again, he's done a lot as far as I would assume the language that we're seeing that's so refined and direct and right to the point of what they're trying to get in these intelligence bills and defense bills in regards to actually getting you know genuine UFO information that the Department of Defense has to the Congress, because they've been blocked off. And Christopher Mellon, he said it publicly now. He's the guy. He worked with Lou, and he got the tapes out, and he brought them to the New York Times.
Yeah, yeah.
So him, Ralph, and Leslie actually all kind of participated in that, and they're going to be here together at this event. Along with Whitley Strieber, and a lot of experiencers, or even people interested in UFOs, will have been familiar with his book Communion, which has been very impactful to many people,
Mhm.
especially the cover.
Yeah, yeah,
you know
that's
um but and again, he also co-authored a book with Jeffrey Kripal called Supernatural. So having them both there together too, there's another dimension of synergy. And again, a Bix participant, or her paper was one of the award-winning papers for Bix, the Bigelow Institute for
yeah, yeah,
Consciousness
yeah.
Studies, Sharon Hewitt Rowlett.
Did
So
you had her on her show, didn't you?
I did not yet. I
Oh,
did
because you
not yet.
had one author you had on your show. I forget whose name.
I had Jeffrey Kripal on. I had Leslie Kane.
I thought
Um,
I meant one of the. I'm sorry, one of the contest winners, but I guess
oh,
maybe
I
I was
had I
missing.
had the winner on,
Okay,
Jeffrey
that's what I
Mishlove.
thought. Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, Jeffrey Mishlove won the first place. I had him on a few months before it was announced.
Yeah,
So when I interviewed him, we didn't discuss that aspect too much. He told me before we did the interview he participated, and we talked about it a little, but when we did the recording, he didn't really get too much into that, just based on the conversation we had.
yeah. He's a legend. I mean, obviously. I mean,
All
he's
these people,
talked
all these
to.
people, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so that's my question. I mean, like, you've put this thing together, obviously, with J. Christopher King, and I think Jay from Project Unity. Is he also a member of the
I mean,
founding group?
he's just, it just happens that he's coming to the event. So,
Okay,
you
okay.
know,
But how difficult is it to put something together like that? I mean, like in New York City too. So like it's not only like, something that happened in Hoboken, it's happening in like the number one media market in the country. And to get a place to do something like that has got to be expensive. I mean, how'd you pull it off?
yeah, I mean, it's definitely Jay and I working together, and Jay has a little experience and things along those lines because of some of his work. But yeah, it's just a lot of, again, it goes to bring it from an idea to making it actually happen is a huge difference.
Yeah. Well,
So
congratulations. I think it's going great. I haven't got my tickets yet, but I will be beaming
live
in.
stream.
Yeah, live streaming in.
And that's
So
one thing I should mention is that the live tickets are already sold out. Um, but you can live stream the event, and it's only $30, and it's like
exactly.
the whole day. It's the
Yeah.
entire day. So you have
Some of
all those
the
speakers.
with some of the best speakers you could possibly have on the subject. So that's amazing.
Right, and not all of them are speaking at all these conferences. Some of them are speaking here and there, but to have them together in this conversation, especially in New York City, there's never been anything in New York City. I mean, not in a long time, and nothing on this level, nothing really serious. Even on the East Coast, like there haven't really been UFO or even consciousness conferences. Where on the West Coast, I mean, they have them all the time, several times a year.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like we need to do something out here in you, because I want to go to these events. I've wanted to attend events like this for a lot of years, and like most UFO conferences I can't go to just because like the time off of work, and getting my kids watched, and like all these things that come into play. So it it's a whole process for me to go across the country. And I think it's great we're able to do this because there is so much interest in New York, in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, the whole area. I mean,
Sure.
people are into the subject, especially nowadays with everything going on with with the Pentagon and kind of how the media is trying to track it, even though they
Some of
have their
them.
yeah, right. And some of them have just been fed stories.
Yeah.
And some of them are doing investigative reporting. So that's the difference in that.
Well, I'm a small town reporter, so I'm doing the best I can with my limited resources, but I depend on guys like you to keep me in the loop or get me in the loop to begin with. So let's talk about your experiences. I'm anxious to hear the story about how you got involved in this topic. I know a lot of podcasters ask that question right off the bat, but I want to get at like what experiences you've had that have convinced you of the reality of this, and also how those came to be and how they transformed you.
Yeah, for sure. I if we take the terminology, as used in the conference name, right? Anomalous experiences. So I think most people at some point in their lives have what we can call anomalous experiences, whether it be a UFO sighting, a precognitive dream, even a lucid dream, right? Or maybe some other people who have experimented with psychedelics, or any, or just had a spontaneous awakening of their consciousness, whether they practice meditation or not. So there's all these kind of spectrum of experiences, and for whatever reason, I've had them as far back as I can remember. From seeing entities in my room when I was very young, and which was extremely frightening because there was like a telepathic lock on thing, and it was like I couldn't not hear, kind of thing. It is really kind of bizarre, but from experiences like that to out of body experiences, and even earlier UFO sightings, these kind of things have always fascinated me, and I never had second guessed it because I'd experienced it.
Sure.
Um, and so even when I was young, I was reading about this stuff, and I was super interested in it. But when I hit just about when I was around 20 years old, because it was 2007, I had a series of UFO encounters that that you know transformed my entire life. Basically, there's no other way to say it. So and there was a series of events that were highly connected, and again, it's to consider that all these kind of just events that I'm going to explain to happen randomly, um, would kind of be insane. So so this is in 2007. So I'm 20 years old, and um, the series of experiences start like this. Um, I was at work. I was working an overnight shift, and one of my coworkers, who's very kind of like conservative, agnostic, or even atheist, and you know, our conversations consisted of, "Hey, how's your family? That's great. Have a good day," kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Cordial work discussion, basically. So out of nowhere, one morning before I leave work, he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico?" And I thought to myself, I'm like, why is he asking me this? Right? Like he no, number one, number two, he didn't know I had an interest in any of this stuff at all. So I thought it was weird, but I kind of thought nothing of it. After that, I drove home and I went to sleep. And this is an overnight shift, so I went to sleep in the morning at like maybe 8:30, 9 a.m. And when in my sleep, I had this insane, vivid list, visceral dream that I'm driving in my old neighborhood, and right above me there's this huge plasma electric energetic kind of UFO, and it's like humming, and I'm like, it has like a hum and the static electricity coming off it, like I feel through the car and my body and all this. And in my dream, I'm reactive, so I'm like, I'm not even thinking, I'm like just trying to escape this thing. um Again, because I was just being super reactive. I was in a dream, and I had this thing right above me, and I was trying to get away from it. And
I get
after like,
it.
yeah, so after like 2.5 minutes, um, I snap out of the dream, and I never did get away from the thing. But I snap out of this dream, and I'm like trying to reorient myself. And a family member came in the house, and I was about to walk out the door, and they said to me, "Hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico?" And I'm like, screw this whole thing now,
Right.
because at that point I'm like, there's something is going on here, and I'm kind of like on the verge of freaking out. Like, what, between all the things, what is this? So I'm like, just trying to collect myself, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to go down the street, because there was this Chinese place. I'm going to go get some chicken and broccoli and relax, because this is nonsense basically at this point. And I get in my car and I start driving, and within 200 or 300 feet of me driving, I just see this fireball in the sky, stationary. And I just automatically I think that's a freaking UFO. And as soon as I thought that, it started to move. And again, this is 3:30 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, in the spring, summertime, perfectly blue sky. And the object, it I mean, it looked like a fireball, literally. It didn't have like flames bursting off it, but it looked like a ball of like this fire. That's the or lava, something. I mean,
Plasma, is that a good word for it, maybe? Or
maybe, right. I mean, but the way when I was looking at it, there was a energetic quality to it that was alive like fire.
wow.
Um, so it started to move after I thought to it, and I started to try to chase it, and I couldn't get it. It eventually got out of sight, and I was like, not freaked. I mean, I was freaked out, but I was like, it was some, a peak experience or an awakening experience. It was a pivotal moment, and like psychologically, mentally, you know, I mean, it definitely affected me. It had a profound effect on me. Um, and I was already at that point into things like meditation and everything, but this was kind of like another level to it. And again, because this seems like a physical object, but actually the whole thing about that experience that struck me the hardest was not even the the sighting with the fireball in the sky per se.
Mhm.
It was the entire sequence of how everything happened, that like that's what really took it home for me. Like, what the hell is this, basically. So sh- just a few months after that had occurred, um, I ended up getting in a car accident. And for some reason I didn't piece these all together automatically.
Mhm.
I actually had to reflect on it to realize this, but where I got in the car accident was exactly where I had the sighting,
Wow.
which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Um, if if that's any coincidence or not. So I ended up getting into this car accident, and I had something akin to a near death experience, but I wasn't near death. In retrospect, at the time, I really thought I was actually dead, and I'll get into why. But it's what I call a trauma induced OBE. So I get into this accident, and I'm like, so before that even happens, so the first thing that happens when I get into this accident is I am face to face with this kind of like like a light being, right? That's the best way. I would say angelic, but I don't know. That's not biblically what an angel is supposed to look like. But it looked like a spiritual entity, like literally it had like a head and shoulders and arms, and it tapered down at the waist to having like no feet, if I can say that, like an energetic being.
Sure.
And um I somehow in this experience knew, like, matter of fact, no question, that this entity was not separate from who I was. And I heard this crazy, intense, like perfect crystalline angelic orchestra that was like heavenly, right? It's like it, and it was, I was just filled with like complete um bliss, but also equanimity. And it felt like heavenly, right? Like, and I'm not so religious in that regard, but I don't know how else to describe these kind of things.
Sure.
um and after that, it's like my reality switched off and then like booted back up and turned back on. And at that point, I was above the accident. And again, this is something I didn't realize until years later after thinking about it. But my vantage point, of the point of view of looking down at the accident, was exactly where the fireball was.
Wow.
And I didn't realize that for years until like reflecting and reflecting.
Yeah.
But that's exactly the vantage point, looking down at the accident. But so I'm kind of above the accident. I see the ambulance, I see the car, um, and I'm thinking to myself, like, so this is it, huh? Like I'm done. This I'm watching, my death basically. So I had that level of awareness as I'm observing this. It wasn't reactionary. It was like what when people say the seer or the observer in Eastern traditions, the self,
Yeah.
um, and I was looking down at the accident, and I was just like completely perfectly cool with everything that was going on. There was no kind of like remorse or upset, or
Fear.
it was nothing. It was just perfect.
Yeah.
Like total equanimity. And then all of a sudden, after a few moments of that, I'm just back in my body. I wake up and I'm like, holy shit, I'm alive, like literally. Um, so the day after that, I um I'm out of the hospital, and I'm like, again, I probably only got a concussion, um, and I'm just like, from that experience, my body even feels different, like physiologically, I'm still like buzzing, right? Um, like I, literally, like I have like a high level of elation. It's almost like I know people use these terms and jargon, sounds silly, but like high vibrations. Like I physically felt that viscerally. I
Mhm.
felt different than how I was before.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm in my house and I'm cleaning, and I'm just like, wow, man, like I'm so grateful to be alive, to be able to sit here and clean and take care of the stuff I have to do. Like it's a gift to be able to do that. Um, to exist, to be alive. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, and again, it's 9 p.m. at night, and it's a summer night. And all of a sudden, I hear a voice in my body. It's in my mind, but it's in my whole body. Like you feel it and you know it. And the voice just said, "Come outside." But as soon as I heard that, I understood like the entire circumstance. I understood everything that was happening and everything that was about to happen. And I did see two entities in my mind when I heard the voice. And so I was like, oh my God, like I knew what was going on. So I ran outside, and I get out the door, and I'm going past where there's like tree coverage. But before I even get out past the trees to be able to look up in the sky, I just hear a very low hum, and it's like vroom, vroom, vroom. And I feel it. I can feel it in my body. And I'm having this, from the second I heard the voice, like a Kundalini awakening, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
energy flowing through my body, elation, bliss, and like there was a mental, like there's some kind of mental but also emotional link to these other entities, and I'm somehow feeling what they're feeling.
Hmm.
um Kind of thing. That I know that that's hard to make sense of, but that's the only way I can describe it. And when I get past the trees, I look up and I see a craft that's almost like a hexagon, except the edges were rounded, not like pointed. And
Solid craft.
solid, like I could have hit this thing with a rock. And it's right above the trees. So maybe it's 80 to 110 feet in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got that this low hum, and I'm freaking out now. Uh basically, um I run down the stairs and I get into the driveway and I'm looking up, and as I'm looking up, it's just kind of gliding over me, and then it disappears and instantaneously reappears 1,000 feet ahead of me over this man-made lake that's over there. And as I'm looking in that area now, because I was, watching where it went, um, I see 2 to 3 other crafts in the sky at the same time, and they have the lights spinning around, and I'm freaking out at this point, and I'm like, did I hit my head in that accident so hard that I'm hallucinating this? Right? Is this like I'm in kind of like shock at this point, and in a good way, but it's almost like the opposite of being frozen with fear. It's the polar opposite of that. Um, and and I couldn't believe it, so I ran in my house because my family members were there, and I said, guys, you got to come outside. And they're like, why? I said, they're here. And they said, who's here? I said, just come outside. And I'm, like I'm totally freaking out. But I have this Kundalini thing going on this whole time, this feeling of connection with this intelligence, and I'm taking it very literally at this point. And my family members come outside and they see, and this whole event of them just moving and disappearing and reappearing in the sky for about 20 minutes.
And your family members saw it too?
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Wow.
And because I needed somebody else to see this, to like make sure this was actually happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I just, again, it's all because all these events happened in this sequence too, which was like, it was just like, if you thought one would have got you, then the second one, and now this third one, right? It was just like, this kind of moment in my life was definitive for that reason, in part. But anyway, so there's these craft that are going there for like 20 minutes, moving along slowly, disappearing, reappearing, and again, there's 2 or 3 at a time. And then the way it's ending is that there's 2 of them, and they're across from each other like this. And then they just start flying towards each other, and the lights are spinning around, and they're flying towards each other. And I'm thinking in my head, holy shit, they're going to crash. And it's the second that they made contact, they just both vanished, disappeared. And that was it. The whole thing was over. The sky was empty. The show was over, whatever kind of demonstration or they were trying to prove to me.
Mm-hmm.
I got, it was done, and I got the point. And, during that whole thing, it was like I felt again, this could be a mental manipulation by technology, I don't know. I'm open to whatever, but I felt that I was connected to these beings, and they communicated different ideas and concepts to me, and they it was, it's hard to explain that.
Is there a particular worldview that you think that was trying to be imparted, or some sort of unveiling of like what might be underneath?
So more so than that, it was their way of being or something. If I
Okay.
can, their state of consciousness.
Yeah.
That's, but they were, again, I could be misinterpreting this, and this is just my kind of mind's reaction and trying to make sense of what happened.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I felt that there was a strong communication and message saying that, these entities or being in intelligence were here, and that they're related to us, and they want people to know about them, that they exist and stuff. And back in early experiences I had different, those kind of different dreams of like world events happening and things like that. Um, so this is not the first time I had a kind of contact like that, but um, I that's the way I felt.
Yeah.
Now, many years later, my thinking on it has, I've continued to think about these things since they occurred.
Have you had any more
And
experiences like that, or was that the last one, or they keep happening?
yeah, so that's a whole nother thing. I mean,
Okay.
kind partially, uh, but um, after that happened, that's when I ended up getting into the CE5 work,
Yeah.
because I had the experience, and again, part of their communication was that they wanted people to know that they were here. And again, now, 15 years or so, whatever, reflecting on these events, I don't know if this was just my interpretation, if that when I saw the beings, if that was actually them, or if it was a representation for me to have a concept to understand, so I can have a better understanding of the encounter that's going on, right? Do I know that the beings that I saw in my mind, that seemed like my eyes were open, but I could see a different kind of world at the same time. It
Yeah.
like it, momentarily. And anyway, so I don't know if those were the actual beings, or if the whole entire thing was some kind of metaphor, as if it did happen. But when it first happened, I was taking it very literally, like that this was a very straightforward thing, that everything that I heard and felt was true. And over years, and again, I had already been practicing meditation and Zen and things like that, Chan, and some Taoist mixtures of that, and other stuff, for a number of years at that point. So, and I was a pretty heavy practitioner, even then, through then. So I started to really think about it, and I did, again, I don't know if those encounters, um, again, what I had seen as far as the beings and what they told me, if any of that's true, or my mind filled it in, or it's just my way of interpreting what they were trying to say. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
That's sort of the
but
impossibility of these experiences, right? I mean, like these things
yeah,
happen and you're left with the pieces to try and sift through and figure out on what level of reality are they operating and communicating, you know?
yeah. Well, and again, what does that place you in the universe? Um, it's really humbling,
Yeah.
to just know that, like, there's other intelligence out there, and if you know um we're just here too, and the universe and is probably even way greater than we can even imagine, because
Yeah.
implications of them and their technology, and not just that, but the way the experience, has the phenomenology, like the phenomenology. um it's not just a sighting, it's a psychic component, it's synchronicity, and it's all these things happening at once.
Yeah.
And yet there's this physical object here. And that's why I like to say a lot that the UFO phenomenon is like the bridge between, physics and metaphysics, because you have a physical object that could be tracked on radar, it could be, tracked on gun camera footage, it can be recorded, to the extent that it kind of gets blurry, right? Um, but yet it's demonstrating the impossible. It's demonstrating what we would consider metaphysical or paranormal, just because we don't quite understand whatever concepts they're utilizing to how their technology works. You know, it's pretty incredible. So I think that, again, through people studying the subject, it's going to help us have a better understanding of what is considered metaphysical, but is just, aspects of the 99% of the aspects of physics we don't understand yet.
Yeah. The reality we haven't really discovered as of yet. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it reminds me of what Jacques Vallée talks about, how, I mean, all these things are manifesting in a physical world, but they seem to be working to prod us into some sort of insights about the nature of reality that maybe we are Well, we definitely, I think, so far are ignorant of, you know.
Yeah. And again, even that's the idea that we can't even see 98% of what's out there. We see a very small percentage, like literally 0.1% of like the actual universe.
Yeah,
And they say the rest is dark matter or whatever, but we're probably just have to evolve more and more, organically, and probably utilizing technologies to see those different aspects of reality.
yeah. The
But
writer Donald Hoffman talks about the
oh yeah,
yeah, he's
wow,
great.
he's incredible.
Yeah, but the whole
Anybody
idea
listening
that
to
we've
this,
yeah,
yeah, just go listen to Donald Hoffman and then re-listen to this too,
yeah,
because it's so he frames it so incredibly.
yeah.
Uh,
That basically we've evolved to see only the niche that we see because that helps us to survive, but in reality that represents nothing about the actual, space and time is dead, I think he says, the whole idea that we really don't know what's going on. And I
yeah,
think one of the things that I value about this whole discussion of the UFOs and the anomalous and all that is it really forces us to reassess what we know. We're so arrogant about like, oh, we've, and it's happened before where you get to the point where like, oh, there's no more physics to be discovered, famously.
yeah,
And then all of a sudden you open up a new can of worms and it's like the horizons are set back and suddenly we're once again in the position of a beginner just beginning to understand the secrets. And I think that hopefully that's where all of this is leading. You mentioned CE5, and
yeah,
obviously there's some controversy around that because of the personality and the persona of Stephen Greer. What I mean, if you were to talk to people about CE5 as a standalone thing, absent Greer, what do you think people should know about it, and divorced from him as a person?
yeah. Well, so I mean, he popularized contact in a way that prior to that has been known as mystical systems, or the occult, basically.
Mm-hmm.
um because it's not as if contact modalities, which are means of contacting the phenomenon, hadn't existed before that. um but I understand when people hear the term CE5, there's a knee-jerk reaction, because Dr. Stephen Greer is the one who created that term. He didn't create the actual contact modality per se. He had his own modified version of that. But you should be able to see between the difference between that's one person and this is the reality of the whole subject.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you go back to the last book that Dr. J. Allen Hynek co-authored, called Night Siege, um, kind of going over the Hudson Valley UFO wave of the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
And even within that book, there's several accounts of people having a mental interaction, well, with the UFO encounters, and the UFOs were responding to their thoughts, or to their intentions, and that's as if there was a communication going on there.
Which is also your experience.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so CE5 is just a term that's used to describe the framework that Stephen Greer created, but is actually based on Dr. J. Allen Hynek's system of close encounters, like the close encounter, the first kind, second kind, third kind. A fourth was added, and then again his variation fifth, which I think it's reasonable that it is another level or category of close encounter. Um, but so CE5 in different forms has been around for thousands of years. It's just a newer kind of contact modality that's in a contemporary framework of science and the science of consciousness, mixed in with a little kind of like Vedic stuff, because that's kind of Greer's background. But the idea of contact and being able to initiate a contact with UFO intelligence or the phenomenon, after I had my experiences, I found that and I was like, oh my God, like why didn't I think to do that for all these years? Right. I was just so passive in in just having things happen, and almost experiences or encounters happen. Um, but so when I heard about CE5, I was like, wow, this, you have, if this is true, you can actually have taken a more active role than just being a kind of bystander in the whole process of contact and anomalous experiences. You are kind of like a participant. And I also understood when I had that encounter um, in 2007, the series of encounters, but the last one, that nobody was going to understand this, what contact is about, or even what, UFOs kind of are about, unless they have that experience. So the idea of CE5, that you can do it, you can kind of have an experience on your own, but you potentially other people who hadn't had encounters would be able to have encounters if they want. And then they'd have, like they'd know, they wouldn't have to wait for a disclosure by anybody to tell them that they're real. They can actually participate in an engagement with the phenomenon, hence engaging the phenomenon.
Yeah,
That's so
yeah. Full circle.
that's right. I really kind of like that approach,
Yeah.
that you're not a bystander. You can participate, you can participate in research and whatever, but you can also participate in an interaction with the phenomenon. And having had experiences, I was like, oh wait, I want to see, have another encounter and see if I can actually do that. And sure enough, I've had a lot of experience with C5 over the years. So since 2009, I mean, back then I was already heavy into meditation. I was meditating for a few hours every day, because I was younger and I had more free time.
Right.
And I was really into it. I didn't really have as many responsibilities. So when I got into like a project like meditation or whatever it was, I'm like all in. And so when I found out about CE5, I immediately started adapting my meditation kind of practice and including it. And within a very short time, I was already having different kind of anomalous experiences and sightings, and the sightings would have interactions with your thoughts, which is what's if people are familiar with Dorothy Ezat or
Yeah.
Dorothy Izat,
The
that's
bites, right?
yeah,
On camera.
that's
Yeah.
I mean, there was a few of Craft as well. There's a compilation of her footage. Tupacabra did a short YouTube video that it's literally 3 minutes, but it shows you so much of her material in the 3 minutes.
Mhm.
Um, those kind of phenomena um, is very similar to CE5, and you
I,
know,
wa I watched a documentary on her, and when they were filming the documentary, there were like lights in the back window that were moving, and I mean, it's extraordinary and absolutely
right,
true as far as I can tell. I mean, I like to think that I have the critical ability to kind of sense when people are on the level and when they're not. And I mean, that whole story screams, you know, reality
yeah,
to me.
right, exactly, and yeah, and she had actually very good documentation, and she had people look at the documentation. She had Dr. J. Allen Hynek
Yeah,
say, "Stay out of the UFO community because it's going to taint your case. It's going
yeah,
to turn into something else, and it's going to become, this kind of silly thing because everybody's going to adapt their opinions onto it and narrate the story basically that way, rather than it just being what happened to her and her experiences." Um, so those kind of things are along par with CE5.
yeah,
Um, and I over the years, and at that time I started the first CE5 social media networking stuff, and have been doing that since. So back then it was like everybody on there was like a team, field working lead. And so we were talking regularly. We were doing tons of CE5 meetups. So over the years I've done CE5 with hundreds of people in the field, around the country. And it's the real deal. And I had some incredible experiences with that. And I always felt like, again, it gave me insights into the phenomenon, into contact, and things like that. So since that point, um, we had been doing the CE5 initiative Facebook group, which has grown pretty ridiculous now. But that ended up shifting into what I'm doing now with engaging the phenomenon,
Hmm.
and in an inclusive way, because there was a lot of thinking in the CE5 field. Um, first of all, there was kind of authoritarian thing going on, um, for better or worse. But, you know, the people in the field, um, I'm sorry, I'm trying to collect my thoughts here.
Yeah, no worries.
Um, yeah, I'm trying to put it in the right way. I totally lost my train of thought there.
No worries, man.
Oh,
One question I did have for you is
yeah.
that Tom DeLonge famously
Oh,
cautioned
yeah.
people about CE5, and you've worked with hundreds of folks and you've fostered this community. In your experience, has there ever been negative, reactions or negative, presences
So,
conjured for
okay.
folks?
Okay. So I have to put this in two ways, because there's me and my experiences
Sure.
and other people and their experiences. So just like I mentioned before, earlier in my life, I had anomalous experiences.
Hmm.
Not all of them were fantastic. You know, I mean, a lot of times they could be jarring or, again, transformative or what have you. It kind of alters your view of reality. Um, so I still, every now and then, even to this day, will have a kind of not positive, or it doesn't seem like a positive anomalous experience. Um, but for as far as CE5, anytime I've done a CE5, I've had, you know, what seem like overwhelmingly positive experiences, right? They've only, you know, enhanced my insight again into some different things, into the UFO phenomenon. And, I looked at it as a path of growth, right? Just like I would meditation and these different things and participating in that. So for me, I had not have any negative experience with C5 ever. On the opposite, they were always like really positive events, and encouraging.
Hmm.
So for other people, again, if you're hundreds of people in person that I work with, but online, thousands and thousands of different both experiencers and people that participate in C5. And overwhelmingly, people have positive experience
Hmm.
with CE5. And over a long period of time, there's been a few cases where I've heard that people had frightening experiences. Um, I don't know if any of them were malevolent per se, or if they were just frightening to the people because they got what they asked for and they weren't ready for it.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I think there may, if there's any negative experiences with CE5, it's it's like not even the 1% of what you hear about when people do a CE5 and have CE5 reports.
Yeah. It's almost like it seems like in other realms, people who their condition in terms of a spiritual ascendance or whatever is reflected back at them by the phenomenon. Would you say that that might be what's going on?
So
You got to be careful
I
there, I guess. You don't want to say that,
well, because here's the thing, I don't want to say I know for any reason why other people are having negative experiences.
sure.
I don't know, and it's something that I question all the time. So I don't want to be like, their consciousness brought that on. Maybe it did. Maybe they'd have a soul contract. Or maybe, it's just another random event of the universe that's, how consciousness interacts with itself, in these different forms. So I'm not really sure why people have the negative experiences. Um, I always think about that. For whatever reason, I've had overwhelmingly positive experiences. And I've thought about that too, that reflective idea, because again, in CE5, you're going out there with the intention of having a positive encounter, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And yet, you know, when people come at it from a different perspective of military and stuff, their experiences are less, less. I don't want to say less friendly, but it's a different type of encounter.
Sure.
And, is that because of the approach that they're going with? It very well could be, on different levels.
Yeah.
So on what level that's occurring, it could be one or it could be multiple.
Yeah. You know, one of the main divisions that you notice in the ufology or whatever you call it, I mean, there is this idea that there's the nuts and bolts side of the craft, and you see a lot of people who are sort of skeptical of, the spiritual or non-material side, want to focus on, how fast it was going, what the materials it was made out of, and all that kind of stuff. And then you have another side that sort of embraces the consciousness angle and talks about that. And there are people obviously who cross both dimensions. But as I've been doing more and more research and discovering how the government efforts have straddled that line, like they're not all nuts and bolts for certain. I mean, there's people who are involved in both elements of it, and people in the intelligence community who are very interested in, Jim Semivan's experience, and everyone, there's a lot of research going into that. I can't help but wonder if the truth is not more on the consciousness side, and that's why there's been so much obfuscation. And I mean, if these were just, craft that were flying around and it meant we were being visited by someone from another planet, that would have only a limited existential impact on us. Yeah, we're not alone. Okay, that's great. There's other intelligent life forms out there. That's interesting. But in order for it to totally redefine the nature of our reality, like has been hinted at, that somber, information that Elizondo talked about, it seems to me that there's something deeper going on. And then like that, there was that recent paper that was put out where you were actually mentioned about the background and the history of all this and how remote viewing tied into it all. It seems like that, I think, and I'll just throw it out there, I'm beginning to think that it lies more on that realm, and that perhaps something was discovered in the process of remote viewing or along those lines, where we began to establish kind of a steady connection or a steady route of investigation. What are your thoughts on
Oh wow. Yeah,
that?
that's pretty heavy.
Yeah,
um I think so. I don't, that's kind of, with engaging the phenomenon, kind of like one of the sublines on that is an inclusive approach to the UFO phenomenon.
mhm.
So I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think it's both
Sure.
actually,
Yeah, yeah,
and in so many different regards. Because you can look at it from the side of, oh, it's a consciousness thing, but it's consciousness teaching us about ourselves through technology and all these other things. You know, but at the same time, we have so many more tools now to look at the UFO phenomenon and have better science on it, or try to have a better materialistic understanding of it. Um, and I think that again, the phenomenon represents both,
yeah,
the technology and a a different kind of aspect of reality and consciousness. So, and I think that the people that are involved on those levels, like the Invisible College people, they know this. Again, you have like
yeah,
Hal Puthoff and Jacques Vallée. They're involved in the Stanford Institute, Research Institute,
yeah.
and
SRI.
and the programs. And at the same time, all these guys are studying the materials that they find. They're tracking down crash retrieval cases. They're trying to find out this, what's going on. They're trying to find out the big picture, and they're coming from a very scientific background, but they also seem to be very open-minded because they didn't negate the psychic effects, so to
Yeah.
speak. And Vallée put together the 7-layer model paper, which is talking about the 7 different layers of the effects of the UFO phenomenon, which is a fantastic paper.
Did he
um
write? That was with Eric Davis, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, which is
Who?
incredible. Yeah,
Yeah. Which
so
is
these
another.
guys kind of, I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say, so these guys, I think they also see it in that inclusive manner, because they're studying the materials and they're trying to get all the corroborating evidence and do the science and try to replicate it likely. And so they're looking at both angles and trying to be inclusive, I think, as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this idea among a lot of folks who follow this that it's actually the bringing together of, those two things is the overall like zeitgeist. You have the materialist science and the what used to be sort of the faith-based, like you were saying, metaphysical, not necessarily faith-based, but what in the past has been returned to as spiritual or religious,
Yeah.
and maybe we're coming together to actually find that there is some point at which they both construct what we think of as reality. An interesting thing about the with Eric Davis, since we were just talking about him, I feel like he's at root here somehow. There have been some comments made by like Elizondo and others where it's like, if only you knew what Eric Davis has done for us, you would be amazed. And I think that something happened, and this is just me, spitballing, but it seems like maybe something happened with Eric Davis, where he was instrumental in some discoveries that were made or have been made. And so I can't wait till the government opens all its vaults and lets us, peruse through the
Well, so
records.
I mean, that to the extent that they are going to, I mean, let's see. I mean, how
Yeah.
much is going to be shown?
Yeah, right. I mean, the report, what is it now? 10 days late or whatever. I mean, and
Yeah,
there seems to be no sign. My thought was maybe they're waiting to see which political party comes
right.
out of the midterm,
I do.
but
Yeah, I mean, I do think we're going to see the report. Even the unclassified version, which for all we know is going to be like 3 pages.
yeah,
Based on how many pages they're saying it's going to be. That there's 350 cases and they have like 20 something pages.
yeah.
So 22 pages. So there's not a lot of detail there. That's probably
Yeah,
highlighting specific cases of the 100, 350. But that one intelligence reporter did say, even though the others were drones and stuff, they did say that from what they heard, 50% of the objects were identified in restricted airspace on a regular basis.
yeah.
So that's, I mean, them trying to pose that idea is just as, I mean, that it just makes
It's
them look
worse.
incompetent.
And it makes it
Right. You
worse.
don't know half of what's in your restricted airspace at any given time.
Yeah,
You can't. So that's even sillier. And somebody on Twitter was like, "Well, that's exactly the point. That's not what they're trying to prove." So
yeah.
I thought that was a very funny comment. Right on.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, the idea that we have Chinese drones flying around our most sensitive secret areas and constantly without interference investigating our secrets, that's way more alarming than there's,
yeah,
for the national
yeah.
security anyway. Yeah, so what do you think? I mean, in terms of disclosure, there seems to be this battle that's going on within the Pentagon. You're well connected. Have you heard any of chatter about that? And I mean, whether the tide may be turning in one direction or the other? Because it sure seems like with that New York Times article that came out, where it's like, oh, I mean, first of all, talk about a firm grasp of the obvious. Most of these can be identified as, worldly objects. Well, no shit.
Yeah,
We all know
yeah,
that. I mean, that's a
yeah,
non-statement. But by saying that, people who aren't informed on the topic are like, oh, well, see, most of them aren't UFOs or aliens. And it's like, no, we never said they were aliens. We're just saying we want to figure out what it is. And I mean, it's such a mind game that keeps getting played. The same moves by the
yeah,
same types of people.
yeah. But it's, I mean, that New York Times article was a feeble attempt. And as somebody had pointed out on UFO Twitter, the guy didn't speak to anybody from Arrow or UAP Task Force. He only had the anonymous source and such.
And Susan
And
Goff.
right,
Eh,
yeah.
I mean,
So yeah.
Darth Vader of the UFO world.
Well, you know what? I don't. She's probably just doing what her job, what she's told to do.
Sure, yeah, yeah, of
And
course.
whatever she has to make a living. I don't think she's like maliciously trying to do it. I think she's just trying to do her job and
Yeah,
takes it very seriously, and it doesn't maybe align with what we're trying to get with transparency, and or what she even is convinced the phenomenon is. Right, maybe she's convinced it's all military stuff and her job is to protect those assets because that's what she's being told, and she believes it because it's
yeah,
convenient for her worldview, and she's just trying to do her job and probably protect U.S. secrets. You know,
yeah.
that would be my best guess. But
But
it's
apart,
they
apart.
it was like a feeble attempt, considering everything that's got how, there's, some of these, kind of opposing forces are trying to use the same old arguments when we are in a different territory. They're just negating what's already occurred,
Yeah.
that there was a hearing on this, and and there's been several language drafts on policy specifically with this issue over the last few years. And the last one in the intelligence bill is incredibly refined language, asking very specific things.
Yeah.
And Congress is pissed because they've seen classified data.
Mhm.
They know we're not just looking at random drones. It's a breakaway technology. No matter what it is, it's a breakaway technology, and it's affecting or interacting with our military on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Um, so even with the flack and the skepticism that's been pointed, first of all, it almost seemed preemptive upon the report. The report didn't even come out yet, and they're trying to frame it before it's out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe people won't be interested to read it. Who knows? Um,
That could be a good
but
sign for what the report might ultimately contain.
right, yeah, I mean, we're not going to see the report until we see it and go from there. But that's not where the language ends. And and if that intelligence bill, it's allegedly has no issues, it's going to get signed the first week of January.
Mhm.
The things in within that bill, which it was like 33 pages of 118 pages was dedicated to UAP, with very specific language asking for specific things. um it's if that gets signed into effect and that starts to become a reality, big things are going to happen. And there's been a lot of talk about these legacy programs, and people coming forward and amnesty to individuals who have been involved in different types of UFO programs that are classified over the last several decades are going to be allowed to, in a classified setting, tell Congress everything they know,
Yeah.
basically. And if that occurs, and it's what we suspect it is, you're talking, about crash retrievals and recovered technology and reverse engineering, akin to the kind of Corso story,
Hmm.
which, Eric Davis said he looked into Corso story, and it basically checked out the main themes of the technology transfer and
Yeah.
development under the private contract world,
Yeah. Yeah.
and to national laboratories. So if that all starts to become true, and they're asking for NDAs and who authorized the NDA for what program. I mean, there's a lot of answers there,
Yeah.
and there's people are going to have to answer to what all that information that they weren't giving up.
Yeah.
Uh, and if that all happens, that's a potential game changer, like really, really point of no return territory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope that all of that. I mean, obviously, I think you're right that the military budget or whatever the rules that are going to get the intelligence, you know, um, allocation get signed in January, and all those things come to pass. It's like it seems like hopefully this is the last dying, gasps of the that secret, trying to like spin it in a way that won't hurt them, and it'll fail. But part of me is like I feel like on some level, maybe we should be angrier about what's gone on. And I understand the idea that like, and not necessarily even amnesty, but just like trying to have a forgiving take on the secret keepers in the past because they were dealing with the tools that they had and they were concerned about what the fallout might be and all of that. But like the longer it goes on, where we're living in under a kind of cover up, which I'm confident exists, it's like if all of that's true, it means that our government has basically made sure that its people live in, I mean, ignorance about the true nature of reality. And that is fundamental. It's like it's so deep. Like it's not just like, oh, we have this new technology and we didn't want to reveal it because of potential repercussions or whatever. It's like, we knew that the universe is entirely different than you've all thought it was for years, but we didn't want to tell you. And it's like, while I can understand that practically, it's like an insult to our intelligence. It brings into questions of who's serving who, and like, um, so in the interest of disclosure, I guess I'm in favor of allowing people to come forward who have been secret keepers in the past, and working through those issues. But man, no matter what, if all this comes to light, it's going to undermine any sense of trust that people have in their government, and that's going to take a long time to repair. You know, um,
Yeah.
that's more frightening to me than a lot of the other possible truths that may come to light about the nature of whatever the phenomenon might be. um Talking a little bit about the legacy programs, though, I know that your name comes up a lot in terms of the Wilson Davis documents. And I was hoping I could get that story from you. I mean, how did you get involved in that, and how yeah, what's the story?
Yeah, so the Wilson Davis documents, that those are notes that Dr. Eric Davis took
Sure.
allegedly, when he met with Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson,
Mm-hmm.
in 2002 by EG&G building in a car. And Davis had gone through Oak Shannon and been able to get a meeting with Vice Admiral Tom Wilson, which Oak Shannon has come forward and said, yeah, Tom Wilson asked me about Eric Davis, and I vetted for him, and so on and so on. But the story actually goes back to 1997, when Dr. Stephen Greer, with the help of Dr. Edgar Mitchell, but also the individual who was able to arrange the meeting with Vice Admiral Tom Wilson, at the time was J2 and Deputy DIA Director, was Commander Will Miller, and that was Stephen Greer's military advisor. And they were both old Navy guys, and they had known each other for quite a while. And actually, there's a letter from Miller to Tom Wilson in 1995 talking about this issue. So, Will Miller is talking with Admiral Tom Wilson, and within 2 years, they meet with Tom Wilson in the Pentagon. That's Dr. Stephen Greer, Sherry Adamek, Mr. Lovekin, Commander Will Miller, Ed Mitchell, and Dr. Stephen Greer. So at that point, Greer and Ed Mitchell and I guess even Will Miller were insisting that they had found out that there are UFO programs, and they found a document that somebody gave them from the NSA, and this is a controversial document to begin with. But the story goes that Tom Wilson was looking at this document that the Disclosure Project had presented to him, and he's like, I know these programs, they're under my command, as J2. So when Tom Wilson went to try to find out about these programs, allegedly, he was told, that he didn't have a need to know. And so he tried to pursue these UFO programs, crash retrieval programs, reverse engineering programs. And, he eventually got a meeting with a lawyer, the security officer, and the project manager. And again, this is highlighted in the notes. Tom Wilson is telling Eric Davis how this all happened when he tried to track down these programs. And they told him, yeah, there's a crash retrieval program. We have craft potentially that could operate. And Tom Wilson was not able to gain access over the program, but they explained to him it was very, they almost got audited, and it would have ended their program. Basically, they would have had no funding, so they had to hide the program this way. And again, Wilson allegedly, according to the notes, and I believe according to even Stephen Greer and Ed Mitchell, that when he tried to get more access to these programs, they told him, listen, if you don't want to lose a star and retire early, drop it.
Yeah.
Which it seems he took very seriously, even to this day. And if he denies any of this that this meeting happened, with Eric Davis, even though Eric Davis can't comment technically, um, there must be a reason why he's denying it if it is true. But it seems very clear that the meeting with him and Eric Davis happened in 2002. There's been so much corroboration. Even Dr. Gary Nolan was kind of saying, "Listen, I know Eric, and I know that basically that the meeting occurred."
Yeah, yeah. And Project
So,
Unity had the Oak Shannon interview recently, which revealed,
which was incredible
yeah, absolutely.
because he was very directly involved in how that meeting occurred.
Now
And
but you got an early copy of the notes, is that right? Is that how you're
yeah,
meeting? Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, what were your thoughts when you first saw it?
when I because Grant had been talking about this document for like a few months on the radio, and
Mhm.
I'm talking to Grant Cameron privately, and I'm like, dude, just give me the document. He's like, I can't, but he's explaining the contents to me without explaining the names.
Yeah,
And I'm very familiar with this Stephen Greer story and Ed Mitchell story for years. I know about this story since I first got involved in the subject.
yeah,
And so when I actually saw the notes, they were up on it was like Reddit and Aminger.
yeah. Because they were up on
And
Reddit and didn't get discovered for a while, right? Like they got
right,
posted to
and
Reddit.
like when we had them, we are like, holy shit, this is the meeting. This is we it made sense once I saw them, and I called Grant and I said, "Hey, is this the document?" He's like, "Yeah," and I'm like, "Oh my god," because this is like an old UFO story, where Greer and Ed Mitchell and Miller met with Admiral Tom Wilson.
Mhm.
So, Eric, we know was with NIDS and Bigelow, and here he is tracking down crash retrieval programs and talking to Tom Wilson. Um, so, you know, it was pretty incredible. And I was already talking to Eric at that point. And, I had to say, hey, Eric, just so you know, this is out. Uh, so
What was his response? Can you tell us or?
I said, can you give me a comment? Because he had given me comments before. And he said, no comment. I can't talk because my, non-disclosure agreements. So
Which
that's
is
his,
not a denial. I mean, then that's like
it's
the thing.
not, it's
Yeah,
not. But everybody around Eric and everybody, even Jacques Vallée I had on, Leslie Kane had seen the notes in 2008. So, there's overwhelming evidence, in my opinion, that at least the meeting happened and the notes were from the meeting. Um, so, yeah, I just happened to have them for a few months and I didn't want to release them because I knew Eric and I wasn't going to contribute and a bunch of people coming after him, trying to ask him questions or have him comment on it when he can't,
yeah.
right? Because he has security clearances. But I mean, if you listen to Dr. Eric Davis, he did a show with Alejandro Rojas in 2019, I think 2018 or 2019, before the notes came out. So maybe it was 2018 on Open Minds TV. And here's Eric Davis talking about all the stuff that you would see in the notes. He's talking about crash retrievals. He's talking about how you get read into the program. He's outlining how he was read into UFO programs basically in this
Mhm.
interview. And it's incredible. He's saying you gotta, get access and you gotta be read in, but it's you're read in, but you can't go any further until you have more need to know, and you can get more clearances, and you come back, and then they can tell you the next layer of the project or the program. And again, those notes came out afterwards, and he's describing the same kind of program. So it's very telling in that regard.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much all I have for you right now. I appreciate so much you taking the time to meet with me and have this conversation. Um, thank you for all your work, man. I look up to you a lot and um, eagerly follow all your work. So
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm just like any other researcher out there, but that's what I like about like UFO Twitter nowadays. There's so many great creators out there. You have Ryan Robbins,
mhm.
post to Slurger World.
Oh,
that
he's
UFO
great. Yeah, yeah,
podcast. There's so Vinny from Disclosure Team, and Jay with the Experiencer Group, everybody, Jay Project Unity,
yeah,
and we all get to participate in this together. And when we're working together on a subject like this, in the way we are, it's highly constructive to the conversation.
yes,
So
exactly right.
I'm just grateful to be able to do what I can do and do my part while I can. And
Yeah.
again, I'm not alone, because there's all these other great people out here doing the work.
Well, and one thing, I mean, before we sign off, the one thing that it really strikes me about you and all those people you just mentioned is that positive momentum. It's like there are people in the UFO community who, even if they're not into the spiritual side of it, they're kind of constructing a religiosity about dogma. It's like, this is what's true. This is not what's true. This is what's accepted. This is not what's is accepted. And so it contributes to this back and forth and bitter. I mean, you know how UFO Twitter can become. It's like people piling on, and
Yeah,
Elizondo had to, like disengage because people were crapping on him so hard. And it's like so undeserved. And you guys are just not that, so you're the people who I turn to get as, real information. And you don't promise it's the truth. You don't talk about knowing more than anybody else, but you just have the conversation and explore it. And I think that that is so important.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that you know it's if we want a certain environment in the research community, we have to create it. We have to maintain it. So I think that the community has been pretty open-minded, and there's a lot of people doing good things out there. And incredible research, like the hermetic penetrator and
Yes.
Omega Point put out that article Lost Threads, and
Yeah,
that
Lost Threads, and I'll
is
link to that in the description. But yeah,
it's
that's
yeah,
great work, man.
it's a total
It's a
masterpiece.
book. I mean, it's like
It's a
150 page.
masterpiece.
Yeah, yeah, it's great.
And so yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to hear Omega Point sometime soon on an interview this weekend,
Oh, for
which is
your
going to be
show.
not me. I
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
you'll see. I helped set it up, but
Right on.
I'm really highly anticipating it, because that you know such a great example of people working together in the community.
Hmm.
You know, Giuliano Marinkovic, we call him UFO Google. He's like, I don't know, maybe he's a hybrid. No, no, but he just does such terrific work behind the scenes, like zero acknowledgement, only amongst like researchers who know what's up.
Yeah,
So he has, contributed to that article in different ways. Grant Cameron, helped out. I tried to help facilitate different things and
yeah,
different parts of the research. And obviously I was cited in the article or the book, right, a
yeah,
number of
yeah.
times.
That's what I was mentioning
Chris,
earlier when I mentioned it. I didn't say the name of the article because I lost
yeah,
my
Loose Threads,
loose
yeah,
threads. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Christopher Walford definitely contributed. So, we were able to work together towards a common purpose. But I mean, again, Omega and the Hermetic Penetrator really did a great service to the community
mhm,
writing that article,
yeah,
because it's super important. And they did all the groundwork. They did the tough stuff, and they did it. And I think it's a fantastic piece. And I don't think anybody, minds, but yeah, Hal said it was Hal Putoff. I
hmm.
showed it to him, and he said this is very thorough and accurate.
Wow, that's
So,
yeah, from the
you
horse's
know,
mouth, right? Literally.
yep, yes, literally. So that's very telling. So,
Yeah.
great job to them on that article.
Yeah, I think that for people who are into UFO Twitter or the UFO verse, whatever, for the first time, if you focus on the folks like that, like yourself, um, you're a lot better served than getting caught up in the political back and forth that occurs when some of the more negative types block those folks and just focus on the positive. It's
Yeah,
my
and just
advice.
make what you want to see. Yeah, make what you want to see. Just create the environment that you want to participate in. You can have one that's not perfect, but somewhat harmonious. I mean, it makes it better for everybody.
Exactly right. And where people can not be afraid to step forward with information because they're not going to get clevered by people who think they know better.
Yeah, right. And that's just one part of it. But again, I see there's a lot of great people out there.
There are.
So it's good to see that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much. I'm gonna work on